Triads. Today we're going to talk about triads. Triads are the backbone of harmony. A triad is a chord containing 3 notes that can be stacked in thirds. And when I say stacked in thirds, I mean that from the bottom note to the middle note, we have a third. The middle note to the top note, we have a third. Here's some other triads. They are already in what we call root position, which means that they are already stacked in thirds, looking nice and neat and clean. And in a second, I'll tell you what root position means and some different types of triads that are not stacked in root position. So notice how each of these is spelled, meaning the letter name of the notes of the chord, spelled with every other letter of the musical alphabet. So E is our bottom note. We skip over F and we have then G, and then we skip over A and we have B. And on the second chord, our bottom note is A, we skip B, then we have C, we skip D, we have E. And our final chord on the bottom is a G, we skip A, that brings us to B, skipping C, and then D. So the spelling is actually going to make a big difference later on. So keep that in mind. Here are different forms of the F major triad. So the first one will be in root position like we just saw on the previous screen, and then there are 2 other ways of drawing the F major triad that are not in root position. Look at the first chord right here. This is our root position triad. We have F, skipping G, we have A, skipping B, we have C. So spelled with every other letter of the musical alphabet, stacked in thirds. From here to here is a third, from here to here is a third. The bottom note of our chord in root position we call the root. The middle note is the third because it is a third above the root, and then the top note we call the fifth because it is a fifth above the bottom note F. Then we have a first inversion chord, this one right here. First inversion means that the note that is our third is now on the bottom. So the third was A. Now A is the lowest note we see in our chord, and then we have the other 2, C and F. Second inversion, that's this one. Second inversion means that the fifth, which is C, is now on the bottom. We have the fifth on the bottom, and then we have the other 2 on top. Now we're going to look at some triads with some accidentals, and we're going to explore some things surrounding the spelling of triads and why the spelling is very, very important. Here are the C major triads. We have our root position one, C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, stacked in thirds. Our first inversion chord, which has the third, that's E sharp, on the bottom. And then we have our second inversion chord where the fifth, which is G sharp, is on the bottom. And you can put these in any octave that you want. You could have, I could have drawn the E sharp instead of here on the first line. I could have drawn the E sharp up here, and then the G sharp, and then the C sharp, but it's just easier to look at when it's on the staff. So you can do them in any octave that you want. They'll still be a triad that way. Okay, let's look at, if we were to play the piano, and we were to play this chord here, C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, the root position one. If we were to play that on the keyboard, these are the notes that we would actually press down to get that. C sharp, that's right here, C up a half step. E sharp, this is the same note as F because of course there's no black key here, right? So E sharp is the same note as F. And then we have G sharp on top, G sharp, there we go. So you might be wondering, if E sharp is the same thing as F, why don't we just write F? That's a lot easier to think about, especially if you're already a piano player. Much easier to think about that as F than it is to think of it as E sharp. The reason we cannot do that is because if we were to write C sharp, F, G sharp, we would not have a triad anymore because they would not be spelled every other letter of the alphabet. So you have to spell it C sharp, E sharp, not F, G sharp. Otherwise, the chord that you have, although it will sound exactly the same as this chord here, it will sound the same, but it will technically not be a triad. And when you get into you know, many years down the road when you're analyzing chord structures of a song, you have to break everything down into triads, and the spelling of the chord will completely mess you up. I mean, it's not even considered a real tonal functional chord if you don't spell it exactly like it's supposed to be spelled. So although F is easier to think about, we have to call it E sharp. Otherwise, we don't have every other letter of the alphabet, and we don't have this nice, neat stack. Okay, moving along. Putting triads into root position. So if you see a chord that has 3 notes in it and it is not stacked nice and neat, you may be asked to stack it nice and neat. So here's how you're going to go about doing that. Okay, 3 notes in a chord. They are not stacked in thirds. You can already tell because this one is a 4th below. So this is not written in root position, but we are going to put it in root position. So think about how you might move 1 or 2 of these notes to get it to look like a root position triad. You can move the notes in different octaves. You can rearrange them in a different order. So you might have already figured out that the easiest way to write this chord in root position is to put the F on the top line instead of the bottom space, which looks like this. We have B, D, and F. We have line, line, line. We have every other letter of the alphabet. B, skipping C, D, skipping E, F. So that's a root position triad. You also could write that in the lower octave. It would still be a root position triad. You could do it there. We still have B, D, F. We have space, space, space. We have every other letter of the alphabet. So it doesn't matter what octave you write it in. You could also do it in the higher octave, starting with B on the ledger line, but for obvious reasons I didn't do that because it is hard to look at. And after all these years, I still have to count the ledger lines once I go beyond like 1 ledger line. So I did not do that, but you could have written it in the upper octave, or even 2 octaves above, or 2 octaves below. Putting triads in root position. Okay, what have we here? We have a chord that at first glance you're probably going to think is not a triad because they are so spread out. However, if you look at the note names and you kind of rearrange them and you move the G way down here somewhere and you move the C as well, you can put it in root position. It would look like that. Or again, you could do it in a lower octave. You could have used the C on the ledger line, and then this E, and then this G. Now we're going to talk about how to figure out if a chord is a triad, because not all 3-note chords are triads. Some of them are clusters or something else. So the first step is, let's see if I can zoom it in here. I can. We're first going to name the notes in the chord, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The second step is, once we have named the notes, we're going to rearrange the note names to see if we can get them in every other letter order. If you can't get them to be every other letter of the musical alphabet, then it is not a triad by definition. So let's look at some examples. Here are 3 different chords. The first one, we're going to first name the notes in the chord. So the bottom note is D. The middle note is G. The top note is C. Here are all of the possible ways we could arrange those 3. And if you try to draw any of these on the staff, you quickly realize it doesn't work. Well, it does work, but it does not make a triad. There's no way that you're going to get C and D not to be touching. It doesn't matter what octave you choose. Doesn't matter if you start on C, start on D. You're always going to have them right up against each other. So that will not ever turn out to be a triad. So the first chord we have here is not a triad. Okay, let's look at the second chord. Starts on F. The next note is A. The next note is E. Here are all the ways we can order those. And if we draw them on the staff, we can also see there is no way to get it so that E and F are not touching. E and F, E and F. No matter what octave or what order, you will never get them to be stacked in thirds. So this is also not a triad. Third example. Bottom note is E, middle note B, top note G, and yes, we can put them every other letter. E, skipping F, G, skipping A, and B. So we could draw this a different way. Now this is all spread out, but you could draw it as such. And here we go. Line, 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 every other letter of the alphabet. This is a triad. And that is triads.